Have you ever stopped to realize that your entire financial life, your rent, your groceries, your mortgage, your credit card bill, your job opportunities, the value of your savings can all change because a small group of people in Washington sit in a room and vote? Most Americans feel inflation. Most Americans feel high or low interest rates, but very few understand how those decisions are made, who decides them, and why those decisions sometimes feel completely disconnected from reality. Today, we're going deeper than the headlines, deeper than the textbook explanations, into the dramatic and often tense process behind how the Federal Reserve truly decides interest rates. Because this story isn't just about economics, it's about pressure, uncertainty, strategy, and the enormous responsibility of controlling a nation's financial heartbeat. And like every powerful institution, the real story is hidden beneath layers of technical language and calm press conferences. But the truth, when you break it apart, is far more human and far more dramatic than most people realize. It all begins long before any official meeting. As the US economy shifts every day, people buying houses, companies hiring or firing workers, global events shaking markets, the Federal Reserve is quietly collecting data. Hundreds of economists across the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks work like detectives, tracking everything that might indicate where the economy is heading. They follow inflation data from the CPI and PCE, but that's just the surface. They examine wage growth, rent inflation, shipping costs, construction starts, energy prices, credit card delinquencies, business sentiment surveys, and even indicators like how many Americans are eating out or traveling. The Fed wants to see not only what the economy is doing, but what it might do in 3 or 6 months. Their job isn't to react, it's to anticipate. Inside the Fed, teams build massive forecasting models that simulate possible futures. They create scenarios. What happens if inflation stays stubborn at 3%? What if it suddenly drops? What if unemployment spikes because companies stop hiring? What if oil prices surge and push up transportation costs? Every potential path is mapped, tested, and compared. And because the economy is unpredictable, these models often produce conflicting results. One model shows cooling inflation, another shows inflation re-accelerating. One suggests the job market will remain strong, another shows weakness. This uncertainty sets the stage for what comes next. When the FOMC gathers in Washington, it's not a casual meeting. It's a moment when the fate of the US economy and sometimes even the global economy sits on the table. 12 voting members, some appointed by the president, some leading regional banks, arrive with their own interpretations of the data. And this is where the human part begins. Every member has their own philosophy, their own experience, their own risk tolerance. Some believe inflation is the greatest threat and argue for higher rates. Others worry about unemployment and recession, pushing for lower rates. These aren't just academic opinions. They're viewpoints shaped by decades of study, political pressure, public expectations, and the weight of previous mistakes. As the meeting begins, each participant gives their perspective. They talk about inflation cooling in some areas, but not others. They discuss wage growth, housing shortages, global conflicts, supply chain disruptions, and how consumers are reacting to higher prices. They debate whether Americans can handle more economic tightening or if they're already stretched too thin. Each comment adds another layer to the decision. And while these meetings are highly professional, they're rarely calm. The stakes are too high and the disagreements too real. Behind closed doors, voices can rise, arguments form. Some push aggressively for rate hikes. Others warn that doing so could trigger layoffs, bankruptcies, and a slowdown that hits families hardest. The Fed must constantly balance two legal mandates, stable prices and maximum employment. But in the real world, those two goals often clash. When the economy is strong and inflation is rising, rate hikes slow everything down. When the economy weakens and unemployment rises, rate cuts accelerate spending but risk reigniting inflation. The Fed is always caught in the middle, and every choice carries consequences. Once discussion ends, the most dramatic moment arrives, the vote. Each member declares the interest rate they believe is right. Sometimes the vote is unanimous, sometimes it's split, reflecting deep divisions inside the institution. But whatever number wins is the number that will ripple through the economy and the lives of millions. Yet the decision itself is only half the influence. The other half comes from the statement, the short, carefully crafted message released to the world. Most people don't realize how intense this process is. Every word is argued over, every verb, every adjective, every phrase is analyzed for the signals it sends to markets. If the Fed describes the economy as expanding, that's a sign of confidence. If they call it moderating, that hints at caution. Investors parse these words like a legal document. A single change, just one word, can move the stock market by billions of dollars in minutes. And then, in perhaps the most publicly visible moment, Jerome Powell steps up to the podium. His press conference is watched by millions, investors, politicians, CEOs, and everyday people who know their mortgage rate might change based on what he says. Powell's tone matters as much as his words. A calm, confident Powell can reassure the markets. A tense or uncertain Powell can send fear across the world. Even the way he pauses between sentences has been analyzed by economists looking for hidden clues. After the announcement, the real effects begin. If the Fed raises rates, borrowing becomes more expensive, mortgage demand falls, car loans become pricier, businesses slow hiring, and consumers start cutting back. Inflation cools, but sometimes at the cost of job losses and slower growth. If the Fed cuts rates, borrowing becomes cheaper, companies expand, consumers spend more, and the economy heats up. Inflation can return, growth can accelerate, but both outcomes often take months to fully appear. The Fed is steering a massive ship and the wheel turns slowly. And underneath all the complex language and technical explanations lies the truth. The Federal Reserve is always reacting to the past to protect the future. They're constantly trying to correct imbalances that began months earlier. Sometimes they act too slowly, sometimes too aggressively, but every decision they make shapes the economic reality of more than 330 million Americans. That is the real story behind how the Federal Reserve decides interest rates. Not a cold mechanical process, not a simple vote, but a high-pressure balancing act filled with uncertainty, disagreement, strategy, and enormous responsibility. Because in the end, raising or lowering interest rates isn't just about numbers. It's about the direction of an entire nation's economy, its risks, its hopes, its people, and the delicate line between stability and crisis. If you found this video useful and want to learn more about the hidden forces shaping the economy, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Peak Economics. That way, you won't miss any of our future breakdowns of money, markets, and the mechanisms that affect your daily life.